Hi everyone. I've been receiving some questions lately about my new book, The Board Member's Guide to Risk, so I thought I'd take a few minutes to answer those here. Well, I've written The Board Member's Guide to Risk to be highly accessible. It's designed to get board members and C-level executives on a level playing field in talking about risk in both its positive and negative ways. In the environment that we're in right now, I think it's particularly important that boards take confident approaches to risk-taking, and that they empower their executives and know that their executives understand the challenges they face. The Board Member's Guide to Risk is about the framework for conversation and addressing and taking risk that I think is essential during this time. No, in fact, as I just mentioned, it's important for the C-suite to be able to talk about risk in the same way, and even more important for the C-suite and the board to have very strong, clear communication, both in terms of the risks that are being seen by the administration and how the board is interpreting their risk tolerances going forward. We don't want there to be any lack of confidence in the executives that the board is behind them and understands the challenges they face. So I would recommend that boards and C-suites all read the book at the same time. Now that might sound self-serving, but the reason we would do something like that is akin to what you do in a book club, to bring the ideas in, to talk about the ones that resonate the most with you, and then to focus on areas that perhaps the executive needs more assistance from the board or vice versa. So it's really written for everyone in the executive suite as well as the board. Now, this is highly practical. The theoretical concepts are important and you'll be referenced to them in the book, but you can read this book in probably an hour and a half if you're very familiar with risk subjects, or 2 to 2.5 hours at most. It's about 100 pages long. I want this to be something that guides you to other resources, guides you to questions and answers as well. But part of what you're doing with this book is to say, do we have the foundation on our board? And do we have the foundation within the infrastructure of the organization to achieve the goals that we have, even facing the challenges that we face today? So it's highly practical. The theoretical concepts are there, and I'll guide you to places that you can go if you want to learn more in depth about the theory behind these things. But it's very practical, and it's something that, again, you should all read together. Well, I spend the first chapter developing reconceptualizations of risk. We're used to talking about risk as loss or risk as uncertainty, and that negative framing affects how we'll talk about risk at the board level as well as the executive suite. So I'm trying to get us to move away from that. Ultimately, where I'm taking us to is a discussion about how risk impacts the trust that others have in our organization. So we have people throughout the organization's social network that provide capital to us. Employees, lenders, customers, suppliers. There are all sorts of different networks that are dependent upon us and want us to succeed. But in order for us to succeed, they need to trust that we're going to fulfill their needs. So our risk-taking always has to be about how it enhances the trust that we have between our organization and those providers of capital. There's an inverse relationship between the cost of capital and trust. Higher trust level, lower cost of capital. That applies to all forms of capital, not just financial capital. So it's essential that we move from this current consideration of risk as loss or uncertainty, something that's deeply ingrained in our discussions and mindset right now during the pandemic, to a place where we look at what we do to affect positively the trust that others have in us. Really important concept development. Oh, absolutely. That's a good use for this. In fact, the book is structured in such a way that it takes you from, again, that initial understanding of how we talk and take risk to conceptualizations of how risk impacts the way in which we make decisions. But there's also a look at the kind of infrastructure that should be in place in an organization, both at the management level as well as at the board level. But we don't just stop at the management of risk. We have to look at why we're doing this. Why do we have to take risks? So there's a discussion about the process of continuous innovation. There's another chapter on the feedback loop, how we bring others into our organization. And then the final chapter is one, what are the next steps you're supposed to take? What is it that you should do to implement the things you've learned in this book? So analysts and investors from the outside can take this book, go through, talk to board members, talk to the executives, ask them about each chapter in here, whether they've implemented this kind of thing and how well they can describe it to them. That's a good measure of whether a corporation is thinking well about risk governance. Well, there are actually two places that I can see this discussion starting. The first would be if your organization already has a risk infrastructure headed maybe by a chief risk officer. It'd be natural for them to bring this up to the board for conversation to say, are we all on the same page? Do we all understand risk in this way? Or someone who's already a member of the board who's interested in seeing the board advance in its discussions about risk. I think one of the most important things when we're talking about a concept that people may or may not be familiar with is that we give them an easy way to get to the same place, so no one at the table feels like they don't understand what's being talked about. Every organization has to take risk. If we don't, we sit still, or actually we work ourselves away from even the status quo today, always in a negative fashion. So it's important for us to be comfortable taking risk, and those two sources are the places the conversation can begin. Yeah, of course I do. But this isn't about making money. The idea behind writing this book and the other work that I do is really about helping to advance practices. I do work with an organization called the DCRO. It's non-revenue, all volunteer. The idea is to share best practices. So I cite in this book some of the work that the DCRO has done. All those resources are available for free online. I'm happy to talk to anybody about what I cover in this book. So yes, of course I want people to buy this book, but the main driver is not that this becomes a bestseller. The main driver is that organizations, particularly in the time that we face right now, can do better at taking risk if they all get on the same page and all talk about risk in more positive ways. So I hope people will buy the book, and I hope they put it to good use. Thanks.